The bullet grazed Isaac Elwood's shoulder just as the sun reached its peak over the dusty streets of Ruby City, Idaho. And he did not flinch, because flinching meant weakness and weakness meant death in this God-forsaken territory. He pressed his back against the rough wooden planks of the assayer's office, blood seeping through his shirt in a dark crimson bloom that he ignored with the practiced detachment of a man who had been shot at more times than he could count. The year was 1867, and Ruby City was still clinging to its boom town status by its fingernails, filled with miners desperate for silver and men desperate for anything they could take. Isaac had been tracking the Garrison brothers for 3 weeks across half of Idaho territory, and now they had him pinned down in broad daylight with his horse spooked and his rifle still strapped to the saddle. He could hear them laughing from their position behind the water trough, could hear the metallic click of hammers being pulled back. He had 2 bullets left in his revolver and 3 men to deal with, which meant he needed to be smart about this, or he would be joining his brother in whatever came after this life. That was when he heard the voice, clear and steady as a church bell on Sunday morning. "You boys looking for trouble or just poor shots?" Isaac turned his head slowly, careful not to expose himself to more gunfire, and saw her standing in the doorway of the general store across the street. She was tall for a woman, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of strong coffee. She wore a simple calico dress covered by a canvas apron, and she held a shotgun like she knew exactly what to do with it. The Garrison brothers stopped laughing. "This does not concern you, miss," the eldest one called out, though his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Best you go back inside. Seems to me it concerns the whole town when you are shooting up the main street in the middle of the day," she replied, not moving an inch from her position. "My father is the sheriff, and he is going to be mighty unhappy when he gets back from boys and hears about this." Isaac watched the exchange with growing interest, his shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat but his mind calculating angles and odds. The woman was giving him an opening, whether she meant to or not. "Sheriff Harper's daughter," the middle Garrison brother muttered, loud enough for Isaac to hear. "Maybe we should. Maybe you should drop your weapons and ride out while you still can," the woman interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Because I guarantee you that shooting a federal marshal is going to bring down more trouble than whatever bounty you think you are collecting." Federal marshal. Isaac almost smiled at that. He was no such thing, just a man with a personal vendetta and a stubborn streak that would not let him quit until the Garrisons paid for what they had done. But the woman's lie gave him the cover he needed. He stepped out from behind the building, his revolver trained on the eldest brother. "The lady makes a good point. You boys have about 10 seconds to decide whether you want to test her aim along with mine." The standoff lasted 5 heartbeats. Then the eldest Garrison spat in the dirt and holstered his weapon. "This is not over, Elwood." "It never is," Isaac replied, watching as the 3 men mounted their horses and rode out of town in a cloud of dust and curses. The woman lowered her shotgun but did not set it aside completely. She crossed the street with measured steps, her eyes taking in Isaac's bloodied shoulder with a practiced assessment that spoke of experience with injuries. "You need to get that looked at before infection sets in," she said without preamble. "Dr. Williamson is 3 buildings down, but he is probably drunk by now. I can do it if you do not mind a woman's hands doing the work." "I can handle it myself," Isaac said automatically, the words coming out harsher than he intended. He had been handling his own injuries since he was 15 years old, since the day his father died and left him to raise his younger brother alone. The woman raised an eyebrow, and there was something in her expression that made Isaac feel like she could see right through the walls he had spent years building. "You could handle it yourself. Or you could let someone help you and not end up with a festering wound that costs you the arm. Your choice, but make it quick because you are dripping blood on the boardwalk. Isaac looked down and saw that she was right. The wound was deeper than he had thought, and the blood was flowing more freely now that his body was coming down from the immediate danger. He felt lightheaded suddenly, the adrenaline fading and leaving only pain in its wake. "Upstairs," the woman said, making the decision for him. She took his good arm with surprising strength and guided him toward the general store. "I live above the shop. Come on before you pass out and I have to drag you." He wanted to protest, wanted to tell her that he did not need her charity or her concern, but his legs were not cooperating the way they should, and his vision was starting to blur at the edges. So he let her lead him through the store, past shelves stocked with dry goods and mining equipment, up a narrow staircase to a small but tidy apartment that smelled of lavender and bread. She deposited him in a chair by the window and immediately set to work gathering supplies. Isaac watched through half-closed eyes as she collected a basin of water, clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, and a needle with thread. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, no wasted motion or hesitation. "My name is Juliana Harper," she said as she rolled up his sleeve to expose the wound. "And before you tell me yours, I should let you know that I already know who you are. Isaac Elwood, former ranch hand from Wyoming, hunting the men who killed your brother last spring." Isaac stiffened, his good hand moving instinctively toward his revolver. "How do you know that?" "Because I make it my business to know who comes through this town and why," Juliana replied calmly, pouring whiskey over the wound without warning. Isaac hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. "And because the Garrison brothers have been bragging in every saloon between here and Silver City about how they shot down some kid who tried to stop them from robbing a stagecoach." The mention of his brother sent a familiar spike of grief and rage through Isaac's chest. Thomas had been 17, barely grown, and he had died trying to do the right thing. Isaac had found him 3 days later, buried in a shallow grave by men who could not even be bothered to give him a proper funeral. "I am sorry about your brother," Juliana said quietly, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice that made Isaac's throat tighten. "But getting yourself killed is not going to bring him back." "I am not trying to get killed," Isaac said roughly. "I am trying to get justice. Justice or revenge?" Juliana asked, threading the needle with steady hands. "Because there is a difference, and one of them is going to eat you alive if you are not careful." Isaac did not have an answer for that, so he stayed silent as she began to stitch the wound. Her touch was gentle despite the circumstances, and she worked quickly to minimize his discomfort. He found himself studying her face as she concentrated, noting the small scar above her left eyebrow and the way her lips pressed together when she focused. "You are good at this," he said after a long moment, more to break the silence than anything else. "I have had practice," Juliana replied. "My mother was a nurse during the war, and she taught me everything she knew before she passed. Someone has to take care of the miners when they get hurt, and like I said, Dr. Williamson is not reliable. Your father knows you do this. My father knows I do what needs to be done." She tied off the last stitch and reached for a clean bandage. "He also knows that I can take care of myself, which is more than most men seem willing to accept about women out here." There was an edge to her words, a challenge that Isaac recognized. He had known women like Juliana before, women who refused to be confined by the narrow expectations society placed on them. His own mother had been one, running the ranch after his father died until consumption took her too. "I am not most men," Isaac said, meeting her eyes directly. Juliana smiled, just a slight curve of her lips that transformed her serious face into something warmer. No, I suppose you are not. Most men would have bled out in the street rather than accept help from a stranger. I did not accept, Isaac pointed out. You made the choice for me. And you let me, Juliana countered, securing the bandage with practiced efficiency. Which means somewhere under all that pride and stubbornness, you know when you are out of options. Isaac wanted to argue, but he was too tired and in too much pain to muster the energy. Instead, he slumped back in the chair and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of Juliana moving around the room. He heard water being poured, the clink of the bottle being set down, the rustle of fabric. When he opened his eyes again, she was sitting across from him with 2 cups of coffee, one of which she pushed across the small table in his direction. "Drink," she ordered. "You lost blood and you need something to help you stabilize." Isaac took the cup because it was easier than refusing, and because the coffee smelled better than anything he had encountered in weeks. It was strong and hot, and it chased away some of the fog in his head. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar in his mouth. He could not remember the last time he had thanked anyone for anything. "You are welcome," Juliana replied simply. "Now, what are you planning to do about the Garrison brothers? Because they are going to come back, and next time they might not be so easily scared off." "I will handle it," Isaac said automatically. "The way you handled it today." Juliana's tone was dry. "You were outnumbered and outgunned, and if I had not stepped in when I did, you would be dead right now. That is not handling it, that is suicide." Isaac's jaw tightened. "I have been tracking them for 3 weeks. I am not going to stop now just because I took a bullet." "I am not asking you to stop," Juliana said patiently. "I am asking you to be smart about it. The Garrisons have connections in this territory, people who will hide them and feed them information. You are a stranger here and that makes you vulnerable, but I am not a stranger and I have resources you do not." "Why would you help me?" Isaac asked bluntly. "You do not know me and this is not your fight." Juliana was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she stared out the window at the dusty street below. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with old pain. "Because 4 years ago, a man came through here who murdered my mother during a robbery. He got away clean, and despite everything my father tried, we never found him. I know what it is like to want justice and to feel helpless when you cannot get it. So, if I can help someone else find what I could not, then maybe it means something." Isaac felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. He recognized the look in Juliana's eyes because he saw it every time he looked in a mirror, that combination of grief and determination that drove people to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. "I work alone," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe it is time you reconsidered that," Juliana replied. "Because from where I am sitting, working alone is not getting you anywhere except shot." Isaac wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence that had defined him for so long, but he could not deny the truth in her words. He had been chasing the Garrisons for 3 weeks and had nothing to show for it except a bullet wound and a close call with death. Pride would not bring Thomas back, and it would not help him survive long enough to see justice done. "What did you have in mind?" he asked finally, the words feeling like both a surrender and a relief. Juliana's smile was sharp and calculating. "The Garrisons have been staying at a mining camp about 10 miles north of here. My father got word of it yesterday, but he cannot do anything officially without proof of a crime committed in his jurisdiction. However, if someone were to ride out there and gather evidence, then he would have cause to arrest them. You want me to spy on them? I want you to be smart instead of reckless," Juliana corrected. "And I want to help you do it because 2 people are harder to spot than 1, and I know this territory better than you do." Isaac shook his head. It is too dangerous. I will not put you at risk. I put myself at risk every day just by living here, Juliana said firmly. This is the Idaho Territory in 1867, not some civilized eastern city. Danger is part of life, and I will not let fear keep me from doing what is right. There was steel in her voice, and Isaac recognized the futility of arguing with her. She had made up her mind, and he suspected that once Juliana Harper decided something, very little could change her course. "You are stubborn," he said, but there was no real criticism in the words. "So are you," Juliana shot back, "which is why this is going to work. We are both too stubborn to quit." Despite himself, Isaac felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It had been a long time since he had smiled, so long that the expression felt foreign and uncomfortable. But there was something about Juliana's matter-of-fact confidence that made him want to believe that maybe, just maybe, he did not have to carry this burden alone. "When do we leave?" he asked. 2 days, Juliana replied. "That gives you time to heal enough to ride, and it gives me time to make arrangements. My father will be back tomorrow, and I need to explain the situation to him. He will not be happy about it, but he will understand." Isaac nodded slowly, exhaustion creeping through his bones. The coffee and the warmth of the room were making him drowsy, and he realized how long it had been since he had slept in a real bed instead of on the hard ground with one eye open. "You can rest here," Juliana said, reading his thoughts with unnerving accuracy. "I have a spare room that you can use, and you need proper rest if you are going to heal." "I cannot impose," Isaac started to say, but Juliana cut him off with a wave of her hand. "You already are, so you might as well accept it. Besides, if you try to go anywhere else, you will probably pass out before you reach the end of the street, and then I will have to drag you back here anyway. Save us both the trouble." Isaac opened his mouth to protest again, then closed it. She was right, and he was too tired to fight anymore. So he simply nodded and let her lead him to a small but clean bedroom with a real mattress and sheets that smelled like sunshine. "Sleep," Juliana commanded from the doorway. "I will wake you for supper." Isaac did not remember his head hitting the pillow. He woke to the smell of cooking meat and the low murmur of voices in the next room. For a moment, he was disoriented, his hand reaching instinctively for the gun on his hip before he remembered where he was. The light coming through the window was golden and slanted, suggesting late afternoon, and his shoulder ached with a dull, persistent throb that was somehow better than the sharp agony from before. Isaac sat up carefully, testing his range of motion. The wound pulled but held, and he could move his arm without too much difficulty. Juliana had done good work with the stitches. He stood and made his way to the main room, where he found Juliana setting the table while an older man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest sat in one of the chairs. The man looked up as Isaac entered, his eyes sharp and assessing in a weathered face. "So you are the one my daughter dragged home like a wounded cat," the sheriff said without preamble. "Isaac Elwood, if the stories are true." "They usually are, sir," Isaac replied carefully, trying to gauge the man's mood. Sheriff Harper grunted. "Juliana tells me you have a vendetta against the Garrison brothers. Also tells me she is planning to help you go after them, which I am less pleased about." "I told her it was not necessary," Isaac said. "I can handle this on my own." "Can you?" The sheriff's tone was skeptical. "Because according to what I saw when I rode in today, you nearly got yourself killed in the middle of my town. That does not speak to good judgment or capability." Isaac felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Juliana set a plate down on the table with more force than necessary. "Father, we discussed this. Isaac needs help and I am offering it. You cannot do anything officially without evidence, and we both know the garrisons will be gone before you can build a case. This is the best chance we have to bring them in." "It is also the best chance you have to get killed," Sheriff Harper countered. "I lost your mother to violence, Juliana. I will not lose you too." The room fell silent, the weight of old grief settling over them like a heavy blanket. Isaac stood awkwardly, feeling like an intruder in a family moment that was none of his business. "You will not lose me," Juliana said quietly, kneeling beside her father's chair. "I know how to handle myself, and Isaac will be there to watch my back. But I need to do this, Father. I need to help someone get the justice we never got." Sheriff Harper closed his eyes and sighed, a long, weary sound that spoke of too many battles fought and too many compromises made. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Isaac. "You keep her safe, you understand me. Whatever happens out there, you make sure my daughter comes home." "I will," Isaac said, and he meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. He barely knew Juliana Harper, but something about her had already worked its way under his skin, had made him care in a way he had not cared about anyone since Thomas died. "Good," the sheriff said gruffly. "Now sit down and eat before the food gets cold. Juliana cooked enough to feed half the town, and I am too old to finish it by myself." The meal was simple but good. Venison stew with potatoes and carrots and fresh bread that Juliana had baked that morning. Isaac ate slowly, savoring flavors he had almost forgotten existed after weeks of hardtack and jerky. Across the table, Juliana caught his eye and smiled, and Isaac felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. They spent the evening planning, spreading a hand-drawn map across the table and marking the locations of the mining camps and known hideouts in the area. Sheriff Harper provided information about the garrison's known associates and habits, while Juliana added details about the terrain and the best routes to take. Isaac listened and absorbed everything, grateful for the knowledge but uncomfortable with the way they were treating him like part of a team instead of a solitary hunter. When the sheriff finally left for his own home and the night settled in around them, Isaac found himself alone with Juliana in the quiet apartment. She was washing the dishes, her hands moving through the soapy water with practiced ease, and Isaac stood awkwardly nearby, unsure what to do with himself. "You can dry," Juliana said without looking up. "Towels are in the drawer behind you." Isaac retrieved a towel and took up position beside her, accepting each clean dish and drying it carefully before setting it on the shelf. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes before Juliana spoke again. "You are not used to this, are you? Working with someone?" "No," Isaac admitted. "I have been on my own for a long time, since your brother died, since before that, since my parents passed and it was just the two of us. I was 18, Thomas was 12. I raised him the best I could, but it was not enough." "It is never enough," Juliana said gently. "No matter how hard we try or how much we do, when someone we love dies, it always feels like we should have done more." Isaac was quiet, his hands stilling on the plate he was drying. He wanted to be a lawman, kept talking about justice and doing the right thing and making the world better. I told him it was a fool's dream, that the world did not work that way. But he would not listen, and when those men robbed that stagecoach, he tried to stop them. Got himself killed for being a hero. "And now you are trying to be the hero he wanted to be," Juliana observed. "Finishing what he started." "I am trying to make sure those men pay for what they did," Isaac corrected. "That is not heroism, that is justice." "Maybe it is both," Juliana suggested. She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him fully. "Maybe you are allowed to be more than one thing, Isaac. You do not have to be just the hardened man who needs nobody. You can be that and also be someone who accepts help when it is offered." Isaac met her eyes, seeing the sincerity there and the understanding that came from her own losses. He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the lifeline she was offering, but years of conditioning and self-reliance made it difficult. "I do not know how," he said finally, the admission costing him more than he expected. Juliana reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and calloused from work. "You start by saying yes when someone offers. You start by trusting that you do not have to carry everything alone. You start by letting yourself be human instead of a stone wall." Isaac looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her smaller fingers and his larger ones, and felt something shift inside him. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, this feeling of connection and vulnerability. "I will try," he said quietly. "I cannot promise more than that." "That is all I am asking," Juliana replied, squeezing his hand gently before releasing it. "Now you should rest. We have a long ride ahead of us in 2 days, and you need to be at full strength." Isaac nodded and retreated to the small bedroom, but sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Juliana moving around the apartment, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had come to Ruby City for revenge, for closure, for an end to the pain that had been eating him alive since Thomas's death. He had not expected to find someone who understood that pain, who looked at him and saw past the walls to the wounded man underneath. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and healing. Isaac's shoulder improved under Juliana's careful attention, and she changed his bandages twice a day with the efficiency of long practice. She also made sure he ate regular meals and got proper rest, overriding his protests with a firm determination that reminded him of his mother. Sheriff Harper stopped by several times, bringing information about the Garrison brothers' movements and checking on Isaac's progress. The older man was gruff but not unkind, and Isaac could see where Juliana got her strength and stubbornness. On the morning of the 3rd day, Isaac woke before dawn and found Juliana already dressed in practical riding clothes, her hair braided down her back and a rifle slung across her shoulders. She had packed supplies for both of them, along with canteens of water and enough ammunition to handle trouble if it found them. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes bright with anticipation and nervousness. Isaac checked his revolver and nodded. "Ready as I will ever be." They rode out as the sun was cresting the mountains to the east, painting the Idaho landscape in shades of gold and purple. The terrain was rough, full of sagebrush and rocks, and the occasional stand of pine trees that provided brief respite from the endless sky. Juliana led the way with confident familiarity, navigating trails that Isaac would have missed on his own. They rode in silence for the first hour, saving their breath for the journey ahead. But as they paused to water the horses at a small creek, Juliana turned to Isaac with a thoughtful expression. "Tell me about Thomas," she said. "What was he like before he died?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the question and the emotion it stirred up. He had been so focused on avenging his brother that he had almost forgotten to remember him as a person instead of just a victim. "He was stubborn," Isaac said finally, a small smile crossing his face. "Stubborn and idealistic, and so damn sure he could change the world. He read everything he could get his hands on, even though we did not have money for books. He would borrow them from the town library and stay up all night reading by candlelight. Drove me crazy because he was always tired the next day when there was work to be done." "He sounds wonderful," Juliana said warmly. "He was," Isaac agreed. "He was also annoying and loud and had this laugh that could wake the dead. But he was good, Juliana. Truly good in a way most people are not, and the world is worse without him in it." Juliana reached out and touched Isaac's arm, a gentle gesture of comfort that meant more than words could convey. "Then we will make sure his death was not in vain. We will make sure the men who killed him face justice." They remounted and continued their journey, the morning wearing into afternoon as they climbed higher into the mountains. Juliana pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the territory, about the miners who had flooded in hoping to strike it rich, and the families who had followed seeking new opportunities. Isaac found himself listening not just to her words, but to the sound of her voice, the passion and knowledge she brought to every topic. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a ridge and saw the mining camp spread out in the valley below. It was a rough collection of tents and makeshift structures, with a few more permanent buildings that suggested the operation had been there for at least a season. Smoke rose from several campfires, and Isaac could see men moving around between the structures. "There," Juliana said quietly, pointing to a larger tent near the center of the camp. "That is where the Garrison brothers have been staying, according to my father's information. They have been working as enforcers for the mine owner, keeping the workers in line and discouraging union talk." Isaac studied the layout of the camp, his mind automatically calculating angles and escape routes. "We need to get closer, see if we can confirm they are there and gather evidence of their crimes." "There is a stand of trees on the eastern side," Juliana suggested. "We can tether the horses there and approach on foot. It will give us cover and a better vantage point." They executed the plan with careful precision, leaving the horses hidden and making their way through the underbrush toward the camp. Isaac was impressed by how quietly Juliana moved, her steps deliberate and confident despite the rough terrain. She had grown up in this wild country, and it showed in every movement. They settled into a position behind a fallen log that gave them a clear view of the camp without exposing them to observation. Isaac pulled out a small spyglass and scanned the area, looking for any sign of the Garrison brothers. It did not take long to find them. The three men were gathered outside the large tent, drinking and laughing as the sun set. Isaac felt his jaw clench as he watched them, these men who had killed his brother and showed no remorse, no consequences for their actions. "That is them," he said quietly, passing the spyglass to Juliana. "All three of them." Juliana looked through the glass, her expression hardening. "They look comfortable, confident, like they do not have a care in the world." "That is about to change," Isaac said grimly. They watched for over an hour as the camp settled in for the evening. The miners finished their work and retreated to their tents, leaving only a few guards on patrol and the Garrison brothers still drinking by the fire. Isaac was preparing to suggest they move closer when Juliana suddenly grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Look at that tent to the left." Isaac followed her gaze and saw what had caught her attention. A young woman was being shoved out of a tent by one of the mine foremen, her dress torn and her face bruised. She stumbled and fell, and when she tried to get up, the foreman kicked her back down. Isaac felt rage surge through him, hot and immediate. Before he could think better of it, he was on his feet and moving toward the camp. He heard Juliana hiss his name behind him, but he did not stop. Some things could not be ignored, no matter how much they complicated the mission. He reached the scene in seconds, his hand already on his revolver. "Step away from her," he said, his voice cold as winter ice. The foreman turned, his eyes widening in surprise and then narrowing in anger. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who does not like seeing women being beaten," Isaac replied. "Now step away before I make you." The foreman reached for his own gun, but Isaac was faster. He drew and fired in one smooth motion, the bullet taking the foreman in the shoulder and spinning him around. The man went down with a scream, and suddenly the entire camp was in motion. Men poured out of tents, shouts echoing in the darkness. Isaac heard the distinctive crack of Juliana's rifle from behind him, covering his position as he reached down to help the injured woman to her feet. "Can you walk?" he asked urgently. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and pain. Isaac half carried, half dragged her back toward the trees where Juliana was waiting, her rifle trained on the advancing miners. "We need to go now," Juliana said tersely. "We just lost any advantage we had." Isaac knew she was right, but leaving felt like failure. They had come here for evidence, for proof to bring the Garrison brothers to justice, and instead he had blown their cover to help a stranger. Thomas would have done the same thing, he realized. Thomas would have jumped in without thinking about the consequences, because it was the right thing to do. They ran through the forest, the injured woman between them, with the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. Isaac's shoulder screamed in protest, the stitches pulling with each jarring step, but he pushed the pain aside and focused on moving forward. Juliana led them through a series of switchbacks and rocky passages that confused their trail, buying them precious seconds. They reached the horses and mounted quickly, Isaac pulling the woman up behind him while Juliana provided cover with her rifle. Then they were riding hard through the darkness, branches whipping at their faces and the sound of gunfire fading behind them. They rode for miles before Juliana finally signaled a halt in a small canyon that provided shelter and concealment. Isaac dismounted carefully, helping the injured woman down before collapsing against a boulder. His shoulder was bleeding again, and he could feel the warm wetness soaking through his shirt. "You tore your stitches," Juliana said, her voice tight with worry and anger. "What were you thinking, charging in like that?" "I was thinking that I could not stand by and watch someone get hurt," Isaac replied, too tired to be defensive. "I know it was reckless, but I could not just do nothing." Juliana was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "You are right, damn it. I would have done the same thing if you had not moved first. But now we have bigger problems. The Garrison brothers know someone is after them, and they will be on guard." "Who are you people?" the injured woman asked, her voice shaky but curious. "And why did you help me?" "I am Juliana Harper, and this is Isaac Elwood," Juliana said, kneeling beside the woman to examine her injuries. "We are hunting the Garrison brothers for crimes they committed. What is your name, and how did you end up in that camp?" "My name is Sarah," the woman replied. "Sarah Mitchell. I was traveling west with my uncle to meet my intended, but our wagon was attacked by bandits. My uncle was killed, and I was taken to that camp and forced to work for them. I have been trying to escape for weeks, but they watch us too closely." Isaac felt his anger reignite at her words. "How many others are being held there against their will?" "Maybe a dozen women," Sarah said. "They keep us to cook and clean and other things. If we resist or try to run, they beat us or worse." Juliana and Isaac exchanged a look, and Isaac could see his own determination reflected in her eyes. This had become bigger than just avenging Thomas. This was about stopping men who preyed on the innocent and thought they could get away with it, because they were far from civilization and law. "We are going to help you and the others," Juliana said firmly. "But first we need to get you somewhere safe and figure out our next move. Can you ride a little further?" Sarah nodded, though she was clearly exhausted and in pain. They remounted and continued through the night, finally arriving at a small homestead that Juliana knew belonged to a friendly family. The Johnsons were good people who asked few questions and offered immediate help, taking Sarah in and promising to care for her, while Juliana and Isaac dealt with the situation at the mining camp. As dawn broke across the Idaho landscape, Isaac and Juliana sat on the porch of the Johnson homestead, sharing coffee and planning their next steps. Isaac's shoulder had been restitched by Mrs. Johnson, who had a practiced hand with medical matters, and he felt marginally more human after some rest and food. "We need reinforcements," Juliana said bluntly. "We cannot take on an entire mining camp with just the two of us, no matter how skilled we are. My father needs to be involved, along with whatever deputies and federal marshals he can round up." "That will take time," Isaac pointed out. "Time those women do not have." "I know," Juliana said, frustration clear in her voice. "But rushing in again will just get us killed, and that will not help anyone. We need to be smart about this." Isaac knew she was right, but the waiting chafed at him. He had spent 3 weeks hunting the Garrison brothers, driven by rage and grief, and now that he was close to finally confronting them, the idea of stepping back felt like weakness. But he also remembered what Juliana had said about accepting help, about not having to carry everything alone. "You are right," he said finally. "We do this the smart way. We get your father involved and we do it properly." Juliana looked at him with surprise and something that might have been respect. "That could not have been easy for you to say." "It was not," Isaac admitted. "But you were right about something else too. I have been so focused on being alone and not needing anyone that I forgot there is strength in having people you can trust at your back. Thomas tried to tell me that, but I did not listen. Maybe it is time I did." Juliana reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong against his. "For what it is worth, I think your brother would be proud of the man you are becoming. Not the man seeking revenge, but the man who stopped to help someone in danger even when it complicated his mission." Isaac felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. He looked at their joined hands and then up at Juliana's face, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time since they met. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was strong and brave and compassionate. She saw past his walls and his wounds to the man underneath, and she made him want to be better than he had been. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping me, even when I did not want to be helped, for seeing something in me worth saving." "You were always worth saving, Isaac," Juliana replied, her voice soft. "You just needed to see it yourself." They sat in silence as the sun rose higher, hands still joined, and Isaac felt something he had not felt in months. Hope, not just for justice or revenge, but for something more. For a future that might include more than just pain and loss. The ride back to Ruby City took most of the day, and they arrived to find Sheriff Harper organizing a posse. Word had reached him about the situation at the mining camp through his network of informants, and he was already preparing to move. "About time you two showed up," the sheriff said gruffly, though Isaac could see the relief in his eyes when he saw Juliana was safe. "I have been worried sick." "I am sorry, Father," Juliana said, dismounting and embracing him. "Things got complicated." "Things always get complicated where you are involved," the sheriff replied, but there was affection in his tone. "Now tell me everything so we can figure out how to handle this properly." They spent the next several hours going over every detail of what they had seen and learned. Sheriff Harper took notes and asked pointed questions, his lawman's mind working through the logistics of mounting a rescue operation against an illegal mining camp. He sent telegrams to the territorial marshal's office in Boise and to neighboring towns requesting support. By nightfall, they had a plan. A force of 20 men, including Sheriff Harper, 2 deputies from nearby settlements, and a handful of trusted locals, would ride out at dawn to confront the mining camp operators and free the women being held there. The Garrison brothers would be arrested for their role in the operation, along with charges related to Thomas's murder. Isaac should have felt satisfied. This was what he had wanted, what he had spent weeks pursuing. But as he sat in Juliana's apartment that evening, watching her prepare a simple dinner, he found his thoughts drifting in unexpected directions. "What will you do after this is over?" Juliana asked, as if reading his thoughts. "After the Garrison brothers are brought to justice." Isaac realized he had no answer. He had been so focused on revenge that he had not thought beyond it, had not planned for a future that did not include hunting and hatred. "I do not know," he admitted. "I sold the ranch after Thomas died. I have no family left, no home to go back to. I guess I figured I would just keep drifting until something else came along." Juliana set down the knife she had been using to slice bread and turned to face him. "What if you did not drift? What if you stayed here in Ruby City?" Isaac's heart began to beat faster. "Why would I stay?" "Because you have people here who care about you," Juliana said, taking a step closer. "Because my father could use someone like you as a deputy. Because this territory needs good men who are willing to fight for what is right. And because—" She trailed off, suddenly looking uncertain in a way Isaac had never seen from her before. "Because," he prompted gently. "Because I would like you to stay," Juliana said, lifting her chin in that defiant way he had come to recognize. "Because in the few days I have known you, you have made me feel things I thought I was too practical and too focused to feel. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, someone worth caring about, and I do not want to let that go just because your mission is finished." Isaac stood and crossed the room to her, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not come here looking for this, did not think I deserved it after failing to protect Thomas. But you make me want to be more than just a man driven by revenge. You make me want to build something instead of destroy." Juliana reached up and cupped his face in her hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then stay. Stay and help me make this town better. Stay and let me show you that accepting help does not make you weak, it makes you human. Stay and let yourself have something good for once in your life." Isaac leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion as weeks of loneliness and pain melted away in the warmth of her embrace. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding into his hair as his arms wrapped around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I will stay," he whispered, "for however long you will have me." "That might be a very long time," Juliana replied with a smile. "I hope you are prepared for that." "I am starting to be," Isaac said, and for the first time in months he meant it. The raid on the mining camp happened 3 days later, at dawn when the guards were tired, and the camp was just waking up. Sheriff Harper led the charge with military precision, his men fanning out to secure the perimeter, while Isaac and Juliana went directly for the tent where the women were being held. The Garrison brothers tried to make a stand, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The eldest brother went down with a bullet in the leg, the middle brother surrendered immediately, and the youngest tried to run before Isaac tackled him to the ground. It was anticlimactic in a way, this moment Isaac had been building toward for so long. But as he helped the freed women onto horses and watched Sheriff Harper chain the Garrison brothers for transport back to Ruby City, he felt something better than satisfaction. He felt peace. The trial took place 2 weeks later, with a circuit judge brought in from Boise to preside. The evidence against the Garrison brothers was overwhelming. Testimony from the rescued women combined with statements from minors who had witnessed their crimes. They were sentenced to hang for murder and kidnapping, and though Isaac attended the execution, he felt none of the savage joy he had expected. Instead, he felt only sadness that Thomas's life had been cut short and a quiet relief that justice had finally been served. In the months that followed, Isaac settled into life in Ruby City with a surprising ease. Sheriff Harper offered him the deputy position as promised, and Isaac discovered he had a talent for law enforcement that went beyond his skills with a gun. He helped resolve disputes, tracked down cattle thieves, and became a respected figure in the growing community. But more than that, he built a life with Juliana. They courted properly, with Sunday dinners at the sheriff's house and evening walks through town and stolen moments in the apartment above the general store. Juliana taught him how to laugh again, how to see beauty in the world instead of just danger. She showed him that strength did not mean shutting everyone out, and that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. 6 months after the raid on the mining camp, Isaac proposed to Juliana on a hilltop overlooking Ruby City. He did it awkwardly, stumbling over words as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. But Juliana said yes before he even finished asking. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony attended by the whole town, with Sheriff Harper proudly walking his daughter down the aisle and Isaac feeling like maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth more than revenge. They built a small house on the outskirts of town, with a garden that Juliana tended and a workshop where Isaac could repair tack and equipment. Sheriff Harper moved in with them after a year, his health declining and his need for family growing stronger. Isaac cared for the older man with the devotion of a son, grateful for the chance to repay the debt he owed for Juliana's love and acceptance. When Sheriff Harper passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years after the wedding, Isaac and Juliana mourned him together, supporting each other through the grief with the strength they had built together. Isaac took over as sheriff, a role he had never imagined for himself but found he was good at. Juliana continued to run the general store and serve as the town's unofficial medical provider, her skills in demand as Ruby City continued to grow. Their first child was born 3 years after their wedding, a boy they named Thomas Harper Elwood. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes, and when Isaac held him for the first time, he wept with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Joy for this new life, this second chance at family. Sorrow that his brother would never meet his namesake, would never see how far Isaac had come from the hardened man seeking revenge. He would be proud of you, Juliana whispered that night as they sat together in the rocking chair Isaac had built, watching their son sleep. Your brother would be so proud of the man you have become and the life you have built. I could not have done it without you, Isaac replied, kissing the top of her head. You taught me that it was okay to accept help, that I did not have to carry everything alone. You saved me, Juliana, in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Juliana corrected gently. That is what love does. It makes us better than we could be alone. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Alice, and she had her mother's fierce independence and her father's protective streak. Isaac watched his children grow with wonder and gratitude, teaching them how to ride and shoot and stand up for what was right. Juliana taught them compassion and courage, how to help those in need and never turn away from injustice. Ruby City prospered over the years, growing from a rough mining town into a proper settlement with schools and churches and businesses. Isaac served as sheriff for 15 years before retiring and becoming a rancher, buying back land near where he had grown up and raising cattle alongside his family. Juliana remained the heart of the community, known for her generosity and wisdom, the woman everyone turned to in times of trouble. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Juliana sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Idaho mountains in shades of purple and gold. Their children were grown now, Thomas working as a deputy in Boys and Alice running the general store in Ruby City with her new husband. Sheriff Harper's grave was on a hill nearby, marked with a simple stone that bore the words, "Good man, better father. You ever regret staying?" Juliana asked, her hand warm in Isaac's. "Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if you had kept drifting?" Isaac thought about it seriously, as he always did when Juliana asked him important questions. Then he smiled and pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and home. "Not for a single moment," he said honestly. "You taught me something I needed to learn, something Thomas had been trying to tell me all along. You taught me that accepting help is not weakness, it is strength. That letting people in does not make you vulnerable, it makes you whole. I was so busy being the hardened cowboy who never asked for anything that I almost missed out on everything that mattered." "I did not teach you that," Juliana corrected with a gentle smile. "I just offered and you were brave enough to accept. That was all you, Isaac." "Maybe," Isaac conceded, "but you made it possible. You saw past the walls and the wounds to the man underneath, and you did not give up even when I tried to push you away. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana Harper Elwood, and I thank God every day that you were stubborn enough to help me when I did not know I needed it." Juliana leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch bustled with quiet evening activity, the cattle settling in for the night and the horses nickering softly in their stalls. It was a good life, a peaceful life, built on foundations of trust and love and mutual support. "Tell me about Thomas," Juliana said softly, as she sometimes did on quiet evenings. "Tell me about your brother." So Isaac did, sharing memories of the boy who had wanted to be a hero and had died trying. But this time, the memories did not bring pain. Instead, they brought a bittersweet joy, a celebration of a life that had been too short but had mattered. And as he talked, Isaac realized that he had fulfilled his brother's legacy in ways he had never expected. Not through revenge or violence, but through building a life dedicated to justice and compassion and helping those in need. The hardened cowboy who had ridden into Ruby City that hot summer day in 1867 was gone, transformed by love and acceptance into something better. Isaac Elwood was a husband, a father, a respected lawman and rancher. A man who had learned that true strength came not from standing alone, but from knowing when to accept the help that was offered. And as the Idaho night settled in around them, Isaac Elwood held his wife close and thanked whatever forces had brought them together. He had come seeking revenge and found redemption. He had been determined to need no one and discovered he needed her more than breathing. He had been a man defined by loss and became a man defined by love. The Wild West was changing, civilization creeping in to replace the lawless frontier days. But some things remained constant: love, family, and the knowledge that accepting help was not a sign of weakness but of wisdom. Isaac had learned that lesson well, and he had spent the rest of his life teaching it to his children and anyone else who would listen. Years later, when Isaac was an old man with silver in his hair and grandchildren playing at his feet, he would think back to that day when Juliana Harper had stepped out of the general store with a shotgun and a determination to help a stranger. He would remember how he had tried to refuse, how he had clung to his independence and pride even as he bled in the street. And he would be grateful every day that she had not taken no for an answer, that she had offered help and kept offering until he was wise enough to accept it. Because in accepting her help, he had found everything he never knew he needed: a home, a family, a purpose beyond vengeance, a love that transformed and healed and made him whole. The hardened cowboy had learned to be human again, and in doing so had discovered what it meant to truly live. And on warm summer evenings, when the Idaho sunset painted the sky in colors that made his heart ache with beauty, Isaac would sit with Juliana and their children and their grandchildren, and he would know without question that this was what Thomas had died for. Not revenge, not justice in the narrow sense, but the possibility of building something good and lasting, of creating a better world one small act of courage at a time. The Garrison brothers were long dead and forgotten, but the Elwood family thrived, a testament to the power of accepting help and allowing yourself to be loved. And Isaac Elwood, once the hardened cowboy who never asked for anything, spent the rest of his days grateful that Juliana Harper had offered anyway, and that he had been brave enough to say yes.